Hello, my name is Martha Brownlee-Duffeck, and I am so deeply honored to receive the 2021 Rehabilitation Psychology Award for Lifetime Practice Excellence. I was so surprised and touched to get this news. I desperately wanted to have something profound to say. Try as I might, only random memories across my professional life popped up, and no one is interested in hearing about my incredibly privileged clinical life for which I was well paid to do work that I loved. While not profound, I did want to share some observations and thoughts about rehabilitation psychology moving forward. First, several observations about my last few years on the Psychology, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. With respect to disability as diversity, the high watermark for us was when I was able to collaborate with the University of Missouri's Office of Disability to bring our own rock star, Erin Andrews, to come speak for a campus-wide event. As funds dried up, we had to do everything locally. I tried renting the documentary Life's Worth Living. We made discussion panels with members of the Columbia disability community. But my most successful effort since Erin's actual appearance was getting graduate students to teach me how to make decent slides and building a talk around Erin's 2019 book, Disability as Diversity. I think it should be required reading for all psychology interns and people training for medical professions. Ditto that for Dana Dunn's recent book on the disability experience. What was striking to me over these various iterations was the absence of anybody but the required interns in attendance. It seemed to be a lack of professional curiosity to me. While most Americans are at least aware of MLK and the 1960s civil rights movement, outside of rehabilitation psychology, virtually no one I know is familiar with the disability civil rights movement that began after that time, culminating in the signing of the ADA in 1990. While professionals are aware that ADA exists, I would bet that relatively few of them outside of Division 22 would be able to identify Judy Heumann or any of the many other disability rights activists of that time. When the Trump administration gutted the ADA, putting the responsibility for building access back on people with disabilities rather than business owners, it seemed as though the press hardly noticed. My point here is that although people with disabilities make up the largest minority in the United States and the only one that any in the able-bodied majority culture can join at any time, their issues and concerns still seem virtually invisible on the national stage. Again, there has been relatively little news coverage of people with severe disabilities living independently in the community with the assistance of an attendant who should have been eligible for vaccines along with our other most vulnerable citizens. Likewise, there has been a lot of concern in the disability community about COVID treatment and what will happen to them in overstretched healthcare environments, which may force care rationing. My most recent observation about the relative absence of attention to disability-related issues came when I was approached by a young person interested in working on disability-related issues who was seeking recommendations for psychology doctoral programs. My first reaction to the description of a relative paucity of such programs was to encourage looking at counseling programs. When this search failed to produce results, I started looking online myself. Now, my search was not exhaustive yet, so forgive me if my conclusions are premature. Since 1980, when I applied to graduate school and there were no established programs for working with medical patients or people with disabilities, the only discipline that seems to have flourished in clinical programs is health psychology. I was dismayed to find less rather than more work in the area of rehabilitation psychology in graduate programs, with a few exceptions, of course. What I did see proliferating in counseling programs was exploring the marginalized identities of African Americans and various ethnic and sexual minorities. This is important work, but inclusion means inclusion. There are lots of people with intersectional identities, and this is not a zero-sum game. What was missing in my mind were faculty members with disabilities or able-bodied allies in collaboration with, say, disability studies folks looking at disability identities, potential for empowerment and well-being. Rhonda Olkin has been publishing on this since at least 2002. Erin Andrews has published on it and talks about it regularly at our annual rehab psychology conferences. And speaking of identity, I have always taken great pride in my identity as a rehabilitation psychologist. As far as I'm aware, we are the only subspecialty that actually identifies advocacy as a core competency. I agree with Tim Elliott and others who talk about the need to produce healthcare policymakers, and I believe our expertise in advocacy may serve us well in this regard. I also believe that policymakers must have the underlying knowledge about the disability experience, whether from lived experience as an insider or as an outsider dedicated to understanding that lived experience through extensive clinical work and collaboration with insiders. I don't pretend to have the answers to the issues that I've raised, and I so wish we were meeting in person so I could hear all your ideas and we could have a lively conversation. In closing, this Lifetime Practice Excellence Award feels like an unexpected crown to my professional life. My heartfelt thanks goes to the people on the awards committee for selecting me. I would also like to thank the many people who contributed directly and indirectly to this award. First, my deepest thanks goes to my beloved brother, Dr. Michael Brownlee, without whose endless patience and guidance I might never have made it to graduate school. Today, as I record this speech, we celebrate his 64 years living with juvenile diabetes. Next, I have to thank Dr. Robert Frank, who mentored me through graduate school and gave me my first job in our profession. I'd like to thank my two oldest and dearest friends, Tim Elliott and Stephanie Hansen, for well over 3 decades of ongoing stories and conversations. I'm also indebted to Erin Andrews for her friendship as well as her professional writing. I want to thank Russell Newton, my longtime friend turned partner after the death of our respective spouses from cancer, whose patience and non-judgment keeps me grounded. And finally, I want to thank all of my students who've challenged me, and my deepest thanks to the many patients and their families who entrusted me with their personal stories and taught me more than they will ever know. Thank you to all. As usual, not to forget the most important part. See you all when we meet again. Bye.